doing really hard things physically makes the stuff we do in life and entrepreneurship seem much easier because you like retrain your brain. So for me, I went and ran this crazy run in Montana called the Rut. That was a couple of years ago. Now it's a thing we do every year. It's going and doing really physical, hard things that are way outside of your comfort zone does magic for your just everyday life. Welcome to the Growth Mavericks podcast, where we know that entrepreneurship isn't just about strategy. It's about stamina. It's about disrupting your default and getting comfortable being uncomfortable so you don't burn out before you break through. I'm your host, Adam Callinan. Let's get to work. In this episode today, we are talking with me. We are trying something different today in Growth Mavericks podcast history. We are actually re-airing an episode of a podcast that I was interviewed on with EcommerceFuel and Andrew Youderian. It seems to have resonated really well with his audience, so we decided to re-release it over here. We spent a lot of time talking about how being a dad has entirely rewired how I see risk, and particularly in building businesses and going and doing hard things, how working 70-hour weeks crushed my soul for a decade, and how all of that led to how we built BottleKeeper really, really lean. And, for the first number of years without employees and up through 60 million in total sales when we got acquired with a total team of 6. There were 4 outside employees plus my partner and I. You get really tactical on some of the math and things around profitability. If you're an e-commerce brand or really anyone going into Q4 trying to sell something, talking about discounts and how leveraging ad spend gets really important. All things that we did really, really well at BottleKeeper, which is how we operated profitably for almost the entire life of the business. We also spent some time talking about coaching. I had a personal performance coach through that transition out of BottleKeeper after acquisition, and how that led to Pentane very organically, and being forced to kind of sit still and take up woodworking and doing some things with my hands, which is now a huge part of my life. So this is all about operating intentionally. Let us know what you think about the podcast. You can always reach us at pod@growthmaverickspodcast.com. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the show.
Adam, like I mentioned at the top, we're going to get into a bunch of stuff about geeky business, performance coaching, how you make better decisions with your ad spend, et cetera, et cetera. But I always ask guests on the show what they're most excited about. And sometimes we don't talk about it all. Sometimes we save it till the end, but I really liked your answer and I'm curious to dive into it right out of the gates. And you said the thing you're most excited about right now is the evolution of your family and kids. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm very, very clear on priorities, and I was not always like that. That's something that I learned and had to put in place as a result of making a bunch of mistakes and building up a bunch of scar tissue, and going through this entrepreneurial journey again with kids when, versus my last company, I did not have kids as we were building it up, is just such an entirely different magical experience. You think about things totally differently. You think about challenge and risk totally differently. At least I do. And watching my wife, Katie, and our young kids, I have a 4 and a 7-year-old, sort of literally evolve through this, it's like the 3rd, but it's really probably the 15th startup I've ever done, has just been magic. And we're doing it in a place, obviously we live in Montana. We're doing it in a place where we get access to the outdoors, and my kids get to grow up in a place where they're really independent and get to go and explore and do things on their own at a very young age. And it's really exciting. It's just been a beautiful thing.
And you can get into this as much as you want, or you can just, plead the fifth or tell me to pass. But what was some of the things that you did in the past, mistakes that you made that are informing your priorities right now?
If I go back post-college, I went into a medical device company. I was not a founder of that company. I was an employee, and I worked my face off for a decade. And I did that thing because I expanded that company to Southern California in 2008. And we did spin off a tech piece that I was a partner in, but I worked so inefficiently, and the business was built so inefficiently, and it was big and it was heavy and it was uncomfortable and you couldn't get away from it. And the result of which is that I worked 70 hours a week for 10 years. And it wasn't until sort of the end of that chapter and doing a lot of self-reflection and education that I realized how disastrous that had been. I mean, it was, look, you can't change it. It was an important chapter. I learned a lot, most of which about what not to do and how not to build and how not to lead. But carrying that forward into BottleKeeper, which I'm sure we'll get into again for the second time, was a huge part of how we built that company. It's why I wanted to build that company with no employees, was because the last one was a nightmare. So it's really informed everything since then.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I think with I'm a big advocate of modulating once you get to a point in your business where you start to reclaim things that are truly important again. Like financial security is super important. And I think you've got to sacrifice a decent amount in the early mid years to make that happen. But the modulating is really important. But for you, it sounds like this was different. This sounds like this wasn't just like, hey, putting in your time and some reps and saving some money and getting experience. It sounds like this was kind of a fundamentally flawed way of doing business for that decade.
It was. It's easy to point at that what we were doing as part of that business model. I mean, it was a medical device company. Like we had warehouses of equipment and delivery drivers and teams of people and sales reps and technicians. Like it was all this stuff. So part of it is just choosing to not build a business in that world, but it also could have been done a lot better. No question.
So when you say your family, is it just the evolution of your family and kids? Is it just having the space and the time and the freedom to really invest in those things? Or are there actually some decisions that you're making very differently with how you spend your time on your family as a result of that?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, I'm just extremely cognizant. Since that period, and to be fair, it took me a while to transition out of that mental headspace, like going from working like that to having the freedom to go, at the time we were in Southern California, to like just go surf in the middle of the day. I was so guilty for so long. I mean, I was writing in a journal at the time. So these are like fun things to go and look back at. Like I was not mentally healthy while we were trying to do that. I was kind of a disaster because there was this huge acclimation period. So, but since then, like I've been very, very protective of where I spend time and how I dedicate and use the time that I have. And I do quite literally now, having kids, look at it as if I say yes to a thing, whatever time that takes, I'm quite literally taking that time away from my children. So it better be good. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. Like we have to do that. I will invest that time, but that is my decision-making process. So I'm like, it's gotta be good. I just don't waste time.
You were getting into BottleKeeper. So we did a podcast, 6-7 years ago now, I think, maybe longer, about the e-commerce brand you started, built, sold, called BottleKeeper. Was rewatching the Shark Tank episode. Great job. You seem like you held your composure super well on that with a lot of stuff going on. That'd be hard to do.
That is editing. That is called editing 100%. They treated us so well. They could have made us, particularly me, look like the biggest morons on the planet, and they chose not to. So
that's a humble take, but I'm sure it was better than you give yourself credit for. It looked good. Yeah. Editing or otherwise, it looked good.
It turned out well.
Yeah. But you went through, did that, sold that company, and even that company, this is pre-AI days, right? And correct me if I'm wrong here, but you were, I think, 60 million in revenue with 4 employees. I don't think you even had an employee until you hit close to 10 million in revenue. We'll talk about Pentane here in a minute. You're not running a physical e-commerce business today. You're still very much in the e-commerce world and helping merchants. But where do you drool the most seeing what's possible to do with AI? This is in your bones. This is in your blood. You've been on the other side, like you just got done talking. And now you've got this whole toolkit of AI. Do you think you could have run that $60 million business with 1 or even 0 employees now, given the tools that are available?
Yes. I mean, short answer, yes. I think that I will clarify that we did 60 million in total sales. That was not our annual number. Most of that came in the last 3 or 4 years of the business, but just for context there. But again, we got into tens of millions, and the reality is we were doing it with a lean team built on automations that were all conditional logic, right? It was algorithms and math and systems that you could connect together that today are just table stakes for e-commerce. It's connecting Klaviyo to Shopify to Zapier to move things around. So now you sprinkle in AI to that, like, holy cow. I mean, we wouldn't have had a customer service team. Zero. We would have had 0 people in customer service. Which means I wouldn't have needed a customer service director to manage offshore VAs that were executing support tickets. We would have had massive efficiencies in marketing and automation that we probably wouldn't have. That was one of the other positions, was head of marketing. Probably wouldn't have needed that. Probably could have automated with AI and systems and all these agentic things happening most of operations. I mean, it was really just moving things from one hand to the other hand. There were important things. I mean, it was retail stuff, but like there are systems for that stuff now. So yeah, I think we could have done it even leaner than we did it, which was pretty lean.
Yeah. What, this is one of my favorite topics to hear. I think a lot of us are in our own little silos and worlds, chatting with ChatGPT and using, any number of AI devices, and tools. But one of my favorite things is to learn how other people use it and for what things other people are using it for. So when you look at, you're obviously in the software business, and apart from programming, it's the obvious one that can just deliver massive dividends. But apart from programming and AI coding, what are maybe the top 3 or 4 ways you're using AI in your business and your personal life?
Well, I will put a huge asterisk on the coding thing, because I'm basically now, and developers are going to hear this and they're all going to cringe. I'm like a 90% developer with Cursor.
You're a vibe coder, right?
I'm like 75% vibe coder, 25% I actually understand what's going on. And it's not you can't build like big robust systems, but just by telling what to do, you can create little goofy apps and do some really interesting things. But at some point you still have to connect it, to an AWS SES system that has to connect to a Vercel headless thing. Like, you do have to know how to use some of the things. That will change 100%. So outside of that very obvious one, which is a really exciting place to be, because I'm now at the point where I can work harder and make it go faster, which has always been my problem with software, not being a developer. I personally use it a lot to have a conversation around very complex topics. I'm really careful, and particularly with my kids, and AI is going to be a part of their life, so I'm not pretending that it's not. I mean, we are, as parents, we choose to be careful about how they do screens and all that sort of stuff. But I am really careful to not use AI to replace things that are creative and part of developing my own brain, if that makes sense. Like, I don't use it to write. I don't use it to create ad copy. I do use it to brainstorm. But if I'm trying to think through a problem, the process of thinking through that problem to get to the solution is where the education happens. And I'm really careful to not use it for that stuff. So I go down these nerd rabbit holes talking, through some specific question in like quantum mechanics that I have, that is just like a fun debate to have with this thing that's smarter than me in that topic. We look up birds and stuff with my kids and those sorts of things.
One of my favorite ways to use it with kids. My kids love using it for images and creative images, sometimes for storytelling and writing and stuff. But my favorite is if we're on a car drive and we're trying to talk about something or learn about something. I'll hook it up to the car stereo through CarPlay, go to ChatGPT voice mode, and we'll just have a conversation. And the stuff that we can ask it, we'll just have, it's almost like it's an extra person riding in the car that just has, it's tapped into 95% of the knowledge in the world. And it's such a fun way to dive deep on topics and to have it be interactive and for kids to really be able to explore, which is cool.
Yeah. We use it very similarly in that I'm big in science and sort of been thinking along the scientific method. So my daughter has a question. We will set up a thought experiment and talk through that thought experiment. And then we'll open up that conversation the exact same way, like put on ChatGPT voice mode. She calls it cat IP'd because in French, I guess ChatGPT means cat IP'd, which is funny. So she calls it, can we talk to cat IP'd? Like, let's talk through it first. Let's get our own conclusion and then we can use it as a reference.
Yeah. I may have mentioned this in the past, but in prepping my kids for debates, there was some debate for part of the homeschool curriculum we were going through. And it was like, I was going to take nuclear power and my daughter was going to take wind power. And so to prep her for our debate, I had ChatGPT pretend to be me and mock debate her, and then after she debated, analyze her debate and tell her where she did well and where some of her points were weak. And it is shocking
That's
how,
incredible.
it's not perfect, but like that would have just made I would have said, if you would have asked me 3 years ago if that's possible, even 2 years ago if that's possible, even after ChatGPT came out, I would have said, no, we're like 5 to 10 years away from that. But the fact that it can do that so well, and I think I'm reminded of that too, where occasionally I showed someone last week ChatGPT voice mode and their head kind of exploded. And this week they downloaded it and they're like, this is amazing. This has been out for how long? So
yeah,
good reminder of how far we've come.
The evolution's nuts in a very short period of time.
Do you use it? I know health is important to you. Do you use AI ChatGPT for any health related stuff?
No, I don't. I use it when I'm like trying to find something specific about the Land Rover that I can't figure out, like shortcut me to the answer to the question. So no,
that's mental
I
health
haven't
related,
gone down that.
Otherwise you could spend.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There is a mental health component there. Yeah.
Totally mental health related. We were, I got a tour of we don't have to spend too much time here, but just very quickly, maybe give people a sense. You mentioned the Land Rover, the Defender. There's a handful of people listening who their ears perked up because they love kind of cool older cars. Give people a quick little teaser on what it is and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, I about 2 months ago bought a 1994 Land Rover Defender 110 pickup out of auction in Pennsylvania. So it spent most of its life in Turkey and Europe and whatever. And it came to me in really good condition for a car that needed love. And now I'm getting to put all this time and love into it. And they're so analog. There's no computer. There's literally not electronics outside of the radio and the tail lights, I guess. So it's fun. You take 2 bolts off of anything and it comes off the truck, which is just epic.
Yeah, that's just cool. Also reminded me too of just it's the need for problem solving with those things is just a really good little playground for applying problem solving skills. And I know probably more than average number of entrepreneurs that like to work on those older cars. And I think especially digital, I think one, maybe because it's tactile. We were talking about that earlier. It's nice to have as a complement to the digital building. But secondly too, it's just, there's a lot of systems that go together and it requires a lot of thinking and it's super frustrating sometimes, but there's also a lot of satisfaction about building something out, getting it working, and then being able to go take it for a drive or adventure. It's pretty cool. So
yeah, for me, it's all about learning how the thing works. I deeply believe I can do or fix anything if I can is at least figure out how it works. And this is a perfect example of that. And that's different in new cars where they're all computers, like not going to happen. You need actual systems and structure and other computers to deal with that. But these old cars, like just learning how a simple diesel motor works gives me the ability to then know how to fix it. And I like that. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. One thing I have learned from working on my old vehicle, and I could have learned this any other place, but for some reason it happened through this. Sometimes it's really frustrating. You get in there and you can't figure stuff out and stuff is broken or leaking and there's a mess and you've got places it's frustrating because you can't get things done. And what I realized, I don't know how this came to me, but the frustration doesn't come from having a task be hard. The frustration comes from not understanding how a system works and understanding how to fix it. And once I kind of realized that, it shifted things a lot for me because I was like, okay, I'm frustrated. Why am I frustrated? I'm really not frustrated because this is difficult. I need to better understand this whole system. I don't have a great understanding of why this is happening. And once that clicked for me, whenever I get frustrated, I just take a step back and try to deeply understand where my gap of knowledge is. And usually if I can do that calmly, sometimes it takes a while, but then I can proceed it with a lot more clarity. But anyway, I don't know why that was such a breakthrough for me. Frustration equals not understanding, but I think that applies in a lot of things. So
that's perfect. Makes perfect sense. Completely agree.
Yeah. Pentane. So you had BottleKeeper, you sold it, took a little time off, started something that necessarily didn't, had 1 or 2 ventures that were not the right fit. But you've been working on Pentane for a little while here. We've got a mutual friend who's been using it. Malcolm over at Pact. It's been transformative for his business. Give people a quick, I mentioned it at the very top, but give people a quick summary of what Pentane does and how it came to be.
Yeah, there are I mean, what Pentane does, the short version, is that it takes in all of the expenses from a business. And I'll come back to why that's important. And it takes in the revenue and advertising, and it puts that into a bowl of soup, and it applies a lot of math, not AI, math. And it tells the operator changes to make in the business to be profitable or to be more profitable. So the operator sets their goal. They say, I want to get to break even or 13% net profit. And it tells you what to do to accomplish that, which is in itself unique because most of the time these systems just give you information and expect for you to figure it out. But because I've actually operated a consumer business at scale, or at least at reasonable scale, like I know the answers to the question. So I've written math to be able to provide those answers to other people. So it is literally the system that we ran BottleKeeper on from start to finish.
And so you can optimize for different things. You could say, hey, we want to gain market share at low margin. Hey, we want to, maximizing profit is most important. You can set your goals at different levels, and then it will optimize around those things.
Yeah, in reality, inside of a business, there are all these different levers that you can pull that change the outcome. And in a business, and this is particularly relevant when you're spending ad spend, so in generally a consumer business of some sort, you have this bucket of expenses and you have the bucket of revenue. And so you have like marketing technology that deals with the revenue, and you have financial technologies that deal with the expenses, but they never overlap. Mm-hmm. They don't ever overlap. And that's a really, really important piece. So there's like never ending MarTech and there's never ending FinTech, but nothing connects those things. And that's where all the levers are. That's where all the magic is. You can't build an ad budget to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, whether it's just drive top line or it's drive bottom line. You can't do that unless you have a really deep understanding of how the business spends money. They're inherently connected. And that's something that we did really, really well at BottleKeeper, which is how we got to the scale we did with no investors and only a handful of people. So it wasn't until after we got acquired that I thought, I realized that could be valuable to other companies. And that all happened organically.
Go a little deeper on this, if you would. Maybe use an anecdote. Let's say you've got somebody who's got a business. They're spending they're spending on Meta, and their goal is, let's say their goal, they've got some traction. Really, their goal is profitability. What's a way in which maybe they're spending money now on their, setting their ad campaign, optimizing, et cetera, that is suboptimal? And kind of walk us through why that's suboptimal, and then what would be a better outcome. And feel free to use any numbers that are easy, but maybe make it a little more real for people listening and tangible. The
biggest mistake that we see constantly, particularly literally in every, if you're under 20 million in revenue, you might be making this, you're probably making this mistake. The smaller you are, the more likely it is. Ad budgets as a whole are largely made up. And that's okay. Like, I totally understand it. I have been in that position. The challenge is that we operators see advertising budget as risk capital because it is at risk. I get that. And how we define what we're going to spend in order to achieve an outcome, if that's to get to break even in your circumstance, completely depends on how it performs. But if we don't spend enough, I'll get into like the semantics on this. But like if we don't spend enough, we don't spend the right amount, it is a mathematical impossibility for you to achieve that break even. And this is what happened early on as I was helping some companies. I realized I started replicating a lot of the systems and math that we had at BottleKeeper and realized, the companies were just dramatically underspending on ad budget. They had a crazy ROAS, like they were at an 8 return on ad spend. That's high, but they were still losing money. So at that point, like ROAS is a vanity metric. It doesn't mean anything if you're still losing money. So the reality is they just weren't driving enough margin dollar in order to pay for their fixed expenses. And again, we can use math to answer those questions. If we can say you want to get to break even, you can put that in Pentane or put it in your spreadsheet or however it is that you're tracking and building these things. And we can work backwards from that to decide how much ad budget needs to be spent, how it needs to perform. What happens if you do a discount because all the math changes? What happens if you add a new employee? All the math changes. What happens as you pull all these levers in the business? We can really, really clarify that outcome again with math, not my personal opinion, not conjecture, not AI.
And can you slide the optimization? Like we kind of talked about the barbells of this. Hey, I want to just spend money at break even ideally and grow my market share. Hey, I want to juice, maximize for profit. I would imagine a lot of people are kind of in the middle, probably, right? Like, hey, I want to be able to grow my business. I want to get more market share. I want to do it profitably. So is that something that you can kind of slide throughout that entire spectrum to kind of really dial that in?
Yeah. I mean, there is quite literally a slider where, yeah, I mean, it's like you set the goal. You can be, there are still companies that are doing the growth at all cost thing, and they are fine losing a 10% net margin indefinitely because they think they're going to raise money forever. And maybe they can. That's fine. That's up to them. You can set that and take this slider and juice your ad budget and see how all that changes, how it changes, how much you're losing, how much you're making, where the margins are at, how it needs to perform in order to create this outcome. You have complete and total control over that. So, but that is the number one thing we see is just unclear ad budgets drive all sorts of problems.
Do you have any like little friendly advice icons that pop up if people put negative 10%, margin on their growth? It pops up to, maybe it gives them just a little loving talking to ask them to reconsider their assumptions about life.
We do. Yeah.
Do you really?
Yeah, we literally do. We say, because when you come into Pentane, like onboard happens really quickly. It pulls in. So if you're using QuickBooks Online, for example, and this is a thing that there is no MarTech that comes close, that does any of this stuff. They only focus on some input number to try to give you a contribution profit number and then tell you a net profit, which is just wrong. I mean, you're like giving somebody a net profit number while just pretending this whole half of their business expense doesn't exist, which is their payroll, their offices, their health insurance. Like that's where companies get in trouble. And you're just pretending that's not there. So problem. When you come into Pentane, the system goes and takes and analyzes all of that data in your QuickBooks account and pulls that in because it's critical. It's mission critical. And if you set your net profit goal at 35% and you're at a negative 5%, it says, that's a really, really good goal. Maybe we should make that more realistic and bring it down to within 10% of where you're currently operating, which is a 7.2% net margin. So there is some guiding that happens in there.
Seems like there would be a lot of room for some pretty fun creative copy in there. That would be sure. That'd be fun to write. When you think about all the math, and this relates to Pentane, but of course just relates to anyone who's running a business, advertising, marketing, along with their entire just kind of P&L stack, in terms of variable and overhead costs. Some of the relationships are very obvious, right? Relationship, for example, between conversion rate and revenue, right? Your conversion rate goes up, in general, your revenue is going to go up, pretty straightforward. Some, I'm guessing, as the man who has modeled these, are much more complicated to model because they have maybe, multiple effects down the chain of different things. What are some of the less obvious relationships or some of the more difficult relationships to be able to think about when people are trying to make these decisions about how much do I spend on my marketing?
Yeah. We know as marketers, there's an expectation that as we increase advertising dollars, performance, however you measure it, whether it's MER, ROAS, like pick your metric, is going to decrease. Mm-hmm. Now, why that happens, congestion in the things, like there's a bazillion reasons we can point out to why that happens. But we know what happens. The other side to that is that, and I'm happy to very specifically talk through the math and how this works. As you increase your ad budget, what you need to achieve in a return on ad spend to meet your goal also goes down. It follows, it's called a negative log curve. It's like an upside down hockey stick. So the more ad budget you spend, if your goal is a 10% net profit margin, the more ad budget you spend, your ROAS, the needed ROAS to achieve that goal also comes down. So it's okay that as we spend more, our performance goes down. We don't want it to. We should try to not have that happen, which is why we're doing conversion rate optimization and trying to increase AOV and do all the things that we do inside of a business. But a business, for a business to get to break even at $10,000 a month in ad spend, they might need a 25 ROAS for that to happen. At $30,000 in ad spend, it might be down to 8. At $50,000 in ad spend, it might be 2.5. Like it's significant how that happens. Now, if you want to talk the mechanics of why that happens, that's where the unknown relationship is. And it's all about contribution margin. or contribution profit, that the same thing, one's just a ratio. That number is the difference between what you sell, the revenue dollars you make, and the expenses related to earning that revenue. So if you sell $1,000 and you have $900 in expenses, that's cost of goods, shipping, fulfillment, credit card fees, Shopify fees, Meta, all that stuff. You have $900. The delta, the difference between those two, that $100 is contribution profit. It's that amount of money that goes to pay for your operating expenses. And what you have left is your net profit. That's where your net profit comes from. So like the magic equation for net profit at the end of the day is your net profit is equal to your contribution profit minus your fixed expenses. So the two big levers that inside them have a bunch of little levers, the two big levers that you can pull to positively impact or negatively impact to impact your net profit are to increase your contribution profit, which is hard, or decrease your operating expenses, much easier. Every dollar you save in operating expenses goes directly to the net profit pile. The problem with increasing contribution profit is it's a ratio. So to cut $10,000 in fixed expenses goes directly to net profit. To earn $10,000 more in contribution profit, based on that ratio I just said, you have to generate $10,000 in revenue. No, $100,000 in revenue, because you're operating at a 10% contribution margin. So only 10% of that 100,000 is contributing. So you have to increase your revenue at the same level of efficiency by $100,000 to create the same net profit impact as subtracting $10,000 out of your fixed expenses. Does that make sense?
100%. I've mentioned this a number of times on the podcast, so forgive me, regular listeners. And I need to revalidate this with some more recent data, but one of the biggest surprising findings I had from one of my State of the Merchant reports was that the most profitable companies were not the ones with necessarily the highest gross margins or that grew the fastest or the best return on ad spend. They were the ones that had their OpEx, their overhead was as low as a percentage of possible of the revenue. They were just super lean. And that's for exactly the reason you said. That was the biggest driver of how profitable you were as a business, which blew me away, and ties in exactly what you're talking about. So
yeah, there are three huge efficiencies that I look at when I look into a business. So this has all been built into Pentane and the reporting that we have. Just a general profit efficiency, a variable margin or variable expense efficiency, and a fixed expense efficiency. What are your fixed expenses relative to your revenue? That is a huge indicator of your ability to be profitable, because the reality is the lower that ratio, the less contribution profit you have to earn to get to break even. Like it's just that much easier gets. And you see that happen in real time. Like you set your ad budget in Pentane to $50,000 a month, and it says your ROAS is 3.5 to get to break even. If you go and remove, which is an option, one of the levers you can pull, you subtract $10,000 in fixed expenses out of the business, that 3.5 will drop to 2.8. I mean, so anything above these are guardrails. Anything above 2.8 is above a 0% a break even. So it's just wild how the weight of operating expenses sits on a business.
Yeah. Any last question on this topic? Any thoughts given your experience running businesses, running Pentane? We got Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up. Super busy time for e-commerce store owners in a couple months. And I mean, you talk about a lot of times people set their ad budgets, just kind of lick the finger, put it up in the air, pull it out of a hat kind of thing. I think that happens a lot with Black Friday. People discount heavily. They run a bunch of promotions. They feel good when they drive revenue. But to your point, the revenue is, there's a lot hiding in that revenue number. If you're discounting like crazy, is it worth it? Anyway, I think there's probably even less thought necessarily, potentially to, and then of course all of your ad spend is going to be less efficient because everyone's, fighting for attention. Any advice you would give people, given your deep experience here, with how to think about their Black Friday, Cyber Monday strategy?
If you're an early stage e-commerce brand doing anywhere from startup to 5 million a year in revenue, Pentane was built for you. It can help you operate more profitably. Just launched is a pulse check report. This shows you what's working, what's not working, and exactly what to do within your business. And this is not just general advice. It is very specific. Like raise your prices by 4.6% to get to break even, or you need to hit a 2.34 return on ad spend in order to remain profitable with your marketing. It's far better than a report you'd get from an outsourced CFO that would cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And right now it is totally free. Head to pentane.com/pulse check to learn more. Yeah, I mean, you're completely right on. And the discounting and sales, I'm not going to tell you not to do them. That's an emotional response to something. The math in and around your business should answer the question what you should be doing and whether you can even do it. And if you're going to do it, what is the needed performance change in order for that to not be a disaster? Like, let's not find out when you get your P&L 5 weeks after that happens that it was a disaster. So as an example, if a business is operating on a 70% variable margin, so that's 70 cents of every dollar goes to those sales related expenses, right? But let's take out of that paid media. Okay. In that circumstance, for that company to get to break even, they have to be at a 3.3 return on ad spend. If that company, like that's okay. I mean, it's high for some company, maybe low for another company, but like achievable, it's realistic. That same company, if they do a 20% discount, that return on ad spend to get to break even goes to 10. Like they have to now get a 10. So if you can achieve that, that's great. If you want to test that, great. But you want to know that that's what the number is while it's happening. So if it's not working, you can make some changes. It's just the discounts are really, really hard on companies unless performance dramatically improves. You got to know what that performance is when you're doing it, so you don't find out again in a month that what you thought was great wasn't actually great.
Yeah. And again, when you're talking about that 70% margin and that 3.3 break even for ROAS, you're incorporating again the overhead. You have to be, because I think a lot of people don't do that, right? They kind of, oh, hey, we got a 50% margin for everything with 2x ROAS break even, easy math. But there's, again, like you mentioned, you're not thinking about all of the fixed expenses you got to cover, the other expenses that go into it, et cetera.
Yeah. And let's be clear, that math that I just did, that's just break even on the order. That's not even taking into account the fact that you have $30,000 a month in payroll and a $5,000 a month office. That's just for the individual order to be contribution profit break even.
How does that work? So I'm thinking like if you had a 50% margin for everything, all order related, excluding your overhead, you should be able to break even with a 2x ROAS, right? Am I thinking about that wrong? So if you had 70,
yeah, you break even on that order, but you're not adding contribution profit to the business. And that's how you pay for your fixed expenses. You're at that point, you're at a 0% contribution margin because you spent $1 to earn $2, and half of that $2 goes to pay for the fixed expenses. So you're at 0.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So that's the big kicker is you can't be at a 2. You need to be at a 2.5 or a 3, depending on the volume, which is a whole other piece of the equation, in order to create enough of that contribution profit to pay for all of your fixed expenses. And if you have $30,000 a month in fixed expenses, you need to generate $30,000 a month in contribution profit to be at break even. Remember, that's net profit equals 0 is net profit, is contribution profit minus your fixed expenses.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people just it's easy to think about because the math is easier and it's universal, spending with just your direct contribution margin per order, margins. But if you're not thinking about your overhead and it's just, you're doing yourself a big disservice. Adam, tell people, super cool product. I've heard great things from people I trust about it. Pentane.com. Give people a quick little, couple thoughts on how, anything else that you do for people, who you're a good fit for and how they can try you out.
Yeah. I mean, the math is the same inside of Pentane for every company on the planet, but we are very focused on e-commerce, mainly because my experience with BottleKeeper can be really helpful there. Obviously Q4 and Black Friday, Cyber Monday are around the corner. So understanding how you're going to discount and being able to see mathematically, in very simple charts and reports, exactly what's happening while it's happening. If sort of air quote, if it is working, you will know the answer to that question. So the timing is really, really, really helpful going into Q4.
Yeah. Pentane.com. That's Pentane.com. So check them out. It's it makes a lot of sense. And if you're not thinking about this analytically, you're probably thinking about it the wrong way. Last thing I want to talk about, Adam, is performance coach. I think this is such a performance coaching, business coaching in general, I think is such an interesting area. I had a coach for about a year, and there was one or two really valuable things that came out of that made me happy that I did it. But a lot of the time, it wasn't necessarily as helpful as I had hoped. I'd love to hear your experience with the coach that you're working with. So who are you working with? How long have you been working with them? Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, the coach that I had, I'm not working with now, but I did see for over a year, which was extremely helpful over the process of that transaction and kind of what to do next. I'm not as most of the people listening to this are not really probably sit still for long people.
No.
The coach his name is Dr. Jeff Spencer. He was exceptional. He was like the 75-year-old wise sage that has fully, and I say fully because I have seen other coaches that did something very specific. This was very much like a lifestyle, because as entrepreneurs, our business blends into our lifestyle. Like we can talk about work-life balance till our heads fall off, but the reality is they're very blended. He was really, really good at helping me frame my next moves, and while at the same time getting me out of my own way, because naturally I wanted to just go jam another startup into reality as soon as, that first week of doing nothing happened. And he helped me to realize that was not the right thing to do. Of course, I didn't listen and did it anyways and learned the hard way, because that's what you do. But that created the space. I got into woodworking. I got into doing things with my hands, which is now a huge part of my life. And that created the space for Pentane to evolve organically. I mean, I did not mean to start a software company. I never in a million years thought I'd have a software company doing what we do now, but it happened really organically, which is how things should happen.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned too, when we were chatting earlier, you sold, and then instead of taking time off, like you just mentioned, you jumped into something. It was really hard for you to take the time off. And then after that, something that you started did not work, you did take the time off. So in general, would you, even though you fought against it and it was difficult, would you say it was helpful having that? I don't know how long it was, 3, 6, 9 months, maybe a year, whatever it was. If you sell a business again in the future, will you force yourself to do that?
Yeah, it was game changing. Here's the thing that you don't, I've been very fortunate to be through a couple transactions. The BottleKeeper transaction was particularly difficult, not because of the state of the business. Like COVID was actually good for our company, and the timing of the transaction was fortuitous. It was good. It was lucky. But the transaction process is horrible. It just goes on. I mean, it took 9 months. We had 2 different companies. One of them was private equity. One of them was a roll-up company. And it's great that you got them competing against each other, and that worked out really well for us. But the transaction process is honestly, for me, was probably the hardest part of that 8-year journey, just because you're trying to run the company while this thing is happening that can quite literally blow up at any minute. I mean, up until the day of the transaction, until you get on the call with all these attorneys and they, do this like 1800s era, everybody say I thing, up until that point, it can blow up. And that's a really heavy thing to carry while you're also trying to like run a company. It was very difficult for me to manage those things. So going from that insanity, that like super intense roller coaster, like that's what made me lose sleep, and I sleep really well, to then you have that call and it just turns off. That was really, really challenging. So having somebody there on my side telling me what was going to happen, which is exactly how it all played out. And then taking that 6 months until I got to the point where I was like, holy cow, I'm bored out of my mind. My brain's melting, was critical. I would absolutely do it again. I'd probably do it for longer, force myself to pick up some new hobby.
Maybe this is a very crude analogy, but almost like, if you're married and you, God forbid, lose your spouse, you don't want to run out a month later and get remarried, right? I always joke with Annie, I'm like, hey, baby, if I kick the bucket, give me 6 weeks and then you go find someone else and be happy. To which she always replies like, 6 weeks? Is that how long you're going to wait if I get, if I disappear? So probably wise to wait a while. Except for me, I would never get remarried. I would just pine for Annie forever.
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like a jerk complaining about a transaction, but it's like you have 9 years of up and down or 8 years of up and down. And then you stack the super intense up and down right on the end of it. And then it just stops. And that transition part is important.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Gives you some clarity too, and rest. So performance, what were some of the things, I mean, obviously having someone who could help you through the process of closing the transaction was helpful. Giving you advice and trying to push you to recharge, to reset, is helpful. From a performance perspective, when you mentioned Dr. Jeff Spencer earlier, you mentioned he was really focused on performance too. What elements of that were helpful, or from a mindset perspective, from a thinking perspective, anything that's relevant, or was he more really helpful for you just in guiding you through that closing process?
No, there were so many things that he pushed me to go and do. And I'm an open-minded person. I'm pretty gullible when it comes to that. Like I'll pretty much try anything short of some highly illicit, addictive compounds. But he pushed me, like he was the performance coach for Team USA for all their Tour de France wins. He's coached Tiger Woods and Branson and like some epic entrepreneurs through transitions. And so it's part of it. He was also an Olympian. He was a cyclist and is still a cyclist at 75, crushing 100 miles a week or something. So part of it is very physical. He pushed me to go and push myself physically in ways that I had never done before. And that I honestly didn't know that I was capable of. It opened up this whole other side of life that is now a huge part of my life. I mean, now I have a podcast about it, about going and doing really hard things physically makes the stuff we do in life and entrepreneurship seem much easier because you like retrain your brain. So for me, I went and ran this crazy run in Montana called the Rut. That was a couple of years ago. Now it's a thing we do every year. It's going and doing really physical, hard things that are way outside of your comfort zone does magic for your just everyday life. But you got to keep doing it. You got to keep doing it though. That's that.
The rut was 6 days ago here. How'd it go?
I broke my toe 2 weeks ago, so I didn't do it this year. I dislocated my pinky toe in the yard doing literally nothing exciting 10 days ago. And so, I couldn't even get a shoe on. That's right.
I forgot.
We do plenty of other hard stuff just normally now, but that was a huge thing at the time. It was like, this is this unaccomplishable feat. What do you mean? I'm going to go run, 25 miles up 10,000 feet of a mountain. But it was epic. It was life-changing for sure.
And why? So I think you mentioned you're not working with them anymore. What made you decide to stop working together?
A big part of it, well, one, it wasn't ever his intent to be your sort of like personal therapist forever. We had set goals at the beginning of working together. And we had accomplished them. And there was, I had the tools and the toolkit, which is how he set it up. I mean, from his deep domain of experience to where at the end of our kind of cycle, I had the tools necessary to go and be able to just implement and operate those things on my own. So, I still check up with him. We're still friends. I still communicate with him, but it was never his intent, for it to be, this like long-term, we're doing this for a decade therapy kind of thing, which I respected. I liked that. That's one of the things was really interesting about him.
Yeah. Coming in very purpose-driven for a period. Yeah. I think the coaching for me, the thing that was the most valuable was sometimes having people look at your life and say, hey, where do you want to go? Here's where you are now. Why are you not doing A, B, and C to get there? And for me, sometimes it's like, well, A is too hard, or B is too expensive, or C is just, that seems ridiculous. And they'd push back and be like, that's silly. You want to go here. You have the resources to do this. Why aren't you doing this? And for me, that was the most helpful part of coaching, even though I'm not also doing it on an ongoing basis either, although I think it's something I need to revisit. Having someone with independent perspective, seeing where you want to go and challenging you as to why you're not putting more resources towards getting there, I think is super powerful and helpful. And sometimes it just gives you the permission you don't need, but helps you get there to actually start going down that road. And for whatever reasons, lots of different times they can be different things. You're kind of blocked. So that's cool. It's helpful for you.
The independent third party is generally helpful, particularly when they come from a wide, completely different base of knowledge and experience.
Yeah. I'm looking at Dr. Spencer's LinkedIn page here. So he's got some epic looking movie I'm excited to play as soon as we hop off here, learn a little bit more about him.
Yeah. Amazing guy.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, again, if you're listening, Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up. If you are just guessing at your ad spend, your marketing budget on the paid side, particularly, without thinking through the financial implications or ramifications, Pentane.com, super reasonably priced for what it will potentially save you. So Pentane.com. Adam, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks. It's been great to connect in Bozeman. Looking forward to hopefully doing it more in the future. And congrats on the past business success you had selling BottleKeeper. We didn't really get into that too much on this one, but a big part of your story and also what you've built over at Pentane. It's super cool. So appreciate you coming on and talking through everything.
It's been great to connect. I did forget to mention, you can use, any of your listeners can use code FUEL. We'll give you the first month free. It is super cheap for what you're getting. It's very super reasonable. You work with me directly, so you're not going to get passed off to a handful of team members or whatever. Would love to see you there. Thanks a ton for having me, Andrew. It's been awesome to get to hang a bit here in the mountains.
Yeah, it's been great. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention too, everyone listening, of course, is a podcast listener. You have a podcast as well. Give people just a quick little preview of that and where they can listen and subscribe if it kind of is a good fit for them.
Yeah, it's called Growth Mavericks. We spend most of the discussions are with other e-com operators, small and large, as well as just people that I find particularly interesting, with the caveat that the other half of the discussion is around these things that we can go and do and build in our life to get comfortable being uncomfortable and to remain resilient for all these like wild ups and downs, and get to that next big inflection point, those things that happen luckily that we don't plan for. So yeah, that's Growth Mavericks. It's a fun time. I really enjoy doing that.
Awesome.
And we're going to have you over there here at some point.
Yeah, it would be fun.
That'd be super fun.
Look forward to it. That'd be a great time. So turn the mics around, but give it a listen. He's got some great guests on there, and yeah, Adam, appreciate you doing this, and thanks a ton.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me. A huge thanks to our guests today. Don't forget, this is powered by Pentane Financial and Advertising Command Center for Consumer Brands. Stop what you're doing, put your phone down, walk away from the computer screen, go outside, get some air, do something hard, push your limits, get uncomfortable, become more durable and more resilient, create the stamina required to get through those entrepreneurial barriers, stay in the game for as long as you can, and we will see you next time.